Welcome to Operation Reengage. I'm your host, PC. Let's get some. In my last couple of podcasts, it would be fair to make the false assumption that I've got some sort of animosity or anger towards women. That would be a false assumption, although I can understand how someone who was leaning toward the feminist agenda or an emasculated man could take the words that I've said and misconstrue my meaning. This is where I'm coming from in my message and my movement and what I'm trying to do with the men that I work with in my program. I'm a firm believer that men are the leaders in a society. You can call that the patriarchy, whatever you want to call it. I don't really give a shit about labels. It works. It's worked for millennia. It's a system that works because men build shit and women take the things that are built and they build a home. They provide society. So when the patriarchy works in a balance, it's a beautiful thing. And what we have today in modern day society is it's a fucking mess. And if you listen to everybody who has a dog in the fight or who believes they have a dog in the fight, everyone's blaming the person on the other side of the fence. So you have factions of men that, have justifiable complaints about the female population, and then you've got the feminist movement and all of its psychosis. And so everybody's pissed off at everybody else, and it's everyone else's fault. And here's the thing. Everyone's fucking right, man. Everyone's right. The women that feel like they've been objectified, whatever it is, they're right. That's their experience in life. And the men that have been taken, in court, who have been abandoned from their children, that have been removed from power, whatever, those guys all have those are viable complaints as well. So nobody's wrong, but the problem is nobody's listening. But the bigger problem is no one's taking accountability for it. No one's taking responsibility for how the fuck we got here. Everyone's a victim. Like, everyone's a fucking victim. Think about it. Everyone who has something to whine about is a victim of things that they have invited into their own lives. The narcissistic society that we live in has cultivated a mindset where the only thing that matters is you, me. And we have fallen into our own shadows. We've fallen into our own mirrors to the point where we don't really seem to be able to look at anything past our own interpretation of the things that we've gone through. And so in these past few podcasts, since I've come back to doing this, it sounds like I stand on one side of the fence, but I don't. I've said all the things that I've said to just lay a foundation to show where I've come from, just to lay a foundation of how I got to where I'm at today. But in understanding these things, you have to take account. You have to take responsibility. We are accountable for the world that we live in, and while I'm a man and I stand heavily on the side of men because shit has gotten out of control, I've experienced the negative parts of the feminist movement, the sexual revolution, all that shit. Like, my childhood was littered with that, with the results of that. But I have propagated the things that I don't like. And all men have, if they've had the ability to do so. Again, I believe that men are the leaders. We're the leaders in society. We're the leaders in life. And generally wherever the leader goes, that's where whoever the leader is head of, that's where they're going to go. They're going to follow. And women by nature are followers, whether they want to. I know it's highly disagreeable with strong and independent, fucking delusional women that really believe that shit right now, but they're followers. And the way that they follow themselves blindly into this abyss that they're trying to pull men into, that's case in point. But my point here is this: what men are seeing today, what we're seeing in the expression of women and the acceptance of being sluts and the rebellion, what we're seeing is this. It's the result of what we've been. Just think about that. Think about that, and when you can really grab the concept that what we are seeing is a mirror of what women have collectively felt. That's what we're seeing. They're acting like their leaders. They have followed their leaders into this fucking abyss. And the leaders, some kind of way, flanked them and have followed in kind. Like, if you can grasp this concept, you'll understand. And every man, boy, who has crossed over into having sexual experiences, if you're in your 30s or 40s and you became sexually active, just for argument's sake, let's say you started having sex when you were 15. Now you're 35 years old. As a man, how many women that you've slept with did you absolutely fucking destroy? Like, just think about that for a second. How many of the girls that you went through in your experience and growing up to who you are today, how many girls did you lower your personal standards for just so you could get one off? How many girls did you lie to about the way that you felt about them just to get one off? And on the other side of that, how many girls did you leave hanging when they made it abundantly clear that they weren't going to have sex with you on the date that you asked them to? So you decided to just ghost on them and call someone that you knew would help you get one off. Like, that's what we see as humans in other humans is a culmination of their experiences. A woman who has gotten to the point where giving herself to random men has become reflexive, almost like that's just the way it goes. For a society to get that way, for us to have the society that we have today, you have to ask how maybe you were complicit in it. How many times have men who have been slighted by these horrible women, how many times did these men do any sort of research on who they were getting involved with? Or was it just the pretty outside that made all the lies that were told believable? What we're suffering today is what we've been. And maybe I'm the only one, maybe I'm the only man in this country who has lied to get laid. Maybe I'm the only man in this country who has told women lies to keep them in place while I go tell other lies to keep these other people in place. I'm probably the only one. And in that case, it's all my fucking fault. But we know better than this. We know better than this. And one of the hardest things to do as a man is to admit when you fucking fail. When you can't measure up. But that's what we've done. We've failed to measure up. Instead of doing the things that we needed to do to become complete men, most guys, and I would say just like the broken women in the 95 percentile, 95% of men, even ones who on the outside look successful, 95% of men are just little fucking boys with just more expensive toys and the ability to do bigger shit. But think about it. From the time you figure out what your piece is for, your whole motivation from the time that happens in your teenage years all the way until the time you reach an epiphany and finally grow up as a man, your whole life is basically motivated about getting one off. And it's gotten to the point where men have viewed everything through the lens of being validated by a woman, which is fucking backwards. It's absolutely backwards, because when you bring a woman into your life as a man, you should have your kingdom established. If your kingdom's not established, all you're doing is hanging out. You're hanging out. And if and when someone comes and it actually has a kingdom established that's just more of a man than you are, it's just the nature of hypergamy. It's not a bad thing. It's just the way it goes. What did you think was going to happen? When you're pretending to be a king and you're just a fucking jester, what did you think was going to happen? Did you think that she was going to believe that the kingdom was yours? Men have got to take responsibility for what we have in our society. We're supposed to be the leaders. Like, everybody likes to brag about being alpha and all this macho stupid shit. Banging a bunch of chicks doesn't make you alpha. It makes you able to bang a bunch of chicks, but what are you actually contributing to society when you do? I mean, what does that do? It cannot fulfill you. I know for a fact it doesn't fulfill you. It might feel good for a couple of hours, but when you go home, how does it feel? How does she feel? Or does it even matter? We're not victims in any of this shit. There's a lot of bad shit that happens. There's a lot of things that men suffer. I've suffered most of it, but I've brought most of it on myself because I made choices before I should have been making those choices. Instead of focusing on the things that I should have been focusing on, I made a woman the center point of my attention. And when you make something outside of yourself the center point of your attention, you get fucking lost. Well, when boys are encouraged to do that, allowed to do that in their teenage years, that sets a precedence for the rest of their lives until either they finally get it or they die never having lived. Always a slave to having to be with a woman, having to be validated by a woman, never given validation to themselves, because as a man, validation of self, the moment you are disrespected, it's time to fucking be done. You correct it or you're done. But men accept shit to the point where by the time there's evidence of wrongdoing or the escape plan, by the time men figure it out, it's too late. And then we want to cry about how wrong we got done. But rarely do we look at what we did or what we didn't do. When I tell the stories about the events in my life, for a long time, I would leave out the parts of the story where the listener would go, well, fucking deserve that, dude. Because we're looking for support. No one wants to be called on their shit. And I'm not taking the female side on this. What I'm saying is it's not all about us. And if it is, then we're going to have to take responsibility for how we got here. This is the magic question that I have for all the men who love sniping women for high body counts. I personally think it's fucking disgusting. But here's the thing that I've come to realize. I've been part of the problem. My lack of self-discipline, my lack of will to not let into any lustful desires, that shit right there caused me to be a notch count on whoever it was that I was involved with. So, collectively, if men want to complain about women who have high body counts, well, at the same time, you can't run around fucking every chick that you meet online. The double standard that I see right now in the community of men who want to vilify, and again, I'm strongly on that side. But if you're going to punish a group for being fucked up, if you played a role in that, you've got to be able to look at yourself and write that course. You've got to be able to write your own shit if you want the external to change. Women are doing what's getting them attention. And right now, the currency that most of them have is sex. The veil has been removed. The taboo it's been taken away. Being sexually liberated, aka a slut, is celebrated as some sort of birthright, as some sort of equality. And here's the catch. We now understand hypergamy. We understand that nature and all that stuff. If you tear down hypergamy to the basic nuts and bolts of it, that's the same thing that men do. We do the same thing, but we've justified it as our biological imperative because men are just naturally geared to do that fucking shit right there is the reason why we are where we are. We believe that it's our right to go fuck whoever we want, and it's just the way that nature made us. Well, who are we fucking? Who are we fucking? What was happening to these girls, these women? What were they turning into? Like, along the way, men have contributed greatly to the shit that we see today, either directly or by abandonment via being not involved in the kid's life, as showing both boys and girls. But these women didn't just become this because of a choice. Just like men, they got there by experiences. And the experiences that led to this were done by men and boys. I'll give you a very simple example of what I'm talking about. How many times did, when you were a young man, if you're in your 20s, mid-20s and up, because if you're below that, you're still really stuck and maybe brand new. How many times did you sit across the table, bar, whatever, from some girl that you wanted to have sex with and just listen to her say some shit that you absolutely wanted to laugh at, but you didn't call her on her bullshit? Like, that's what all of us do. That's what every boy tends to fucking do. We don't tell women the truth when they're young and we first come into our sex. We rarely do that. We want to be impressive. We want them to feel accepted. So what we do is we lower our standards and sit across someone who we're sitting there going, this is a fucking moron. but your dick is keeping you sitting in that chair instead of you going, you know what? I have no interest in you whatsoever. Being fair. Most guys will sit there, suck up this insufferable conversation, pretend that this fucking dummy is amusing just to have sex. And then some things happen after that when you realize you never want to see her again. You cause an injury to this human being that is just stupid. She's just dumb. And she was doing what she believed was going to get her whatever she was looking for. And if she was just looking for sex, no harm, no foul. But what about the ones who have been taught that that's the currency that you give for attention and to build a future? Right? Like, and at a very minimum, you allow this person to walk away thinking that they're intelligent and smart and just has a really good conversation. So you have women that just because they're attractive never get told the truth. They don't get told the truth. So they walk through life believing that they can be it all, have it all, because no one tells them the truth. And men constantly lay down their fucking jacket so they can walk over a dry floor. And all of us have done this. This is where that's the beginning. And it only gets worse. We don't really pay attention to the person. We only pay attention to our lustful desires to conquest and all this because it's our biological imperative. But for women, it doesn't work that way. Okay, then it can't work for us. Because we are leaders and we have led them with that bullshit. And I'm not saying that it's wrong to do that. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. But you cannot be fucking upset for a dog biting you when you rough this motherfucker up every time you go to feed it. Or neglect it and kick it after you call it over and pet it. Eventually it will fucking turn on you. Even the best dog will turn on you. Dogs are more obedient than women are. We have got to take responsibility for what we've done and start looking at these people as humans instead of just something that we can stick our dicks inside of. Like, we only think about our feelings when they get hurt and or when, you know, when everything's awesome, we would escalate some bullshit. We don't think about the other person's feelings. And you can't when all you're blinded by is the chemical release that sex gets. When you get to that, when that's all you're motivated by, and the abundance of it, it's too easy. It is too easy to become part of the problem. It's too easy, man. Women are broken because men have been broken. In my last podcast, I told a story about the person who basically fed me red pill awareness and brought me out of the delusions that I had grown up with. Now, in that story, this person sounds like the typical American thought. And for all intents and purposes, that's exactly what she turned out to be. But after I recovered from my own slighted injury perception and all of that shit that we tend to go through when we suffer those sort of experiences, I was able to look at some realities, and the things that I saw changed pretty much the way that I felt and the way that I looked at this person. While I don't have any respect for her as a woman, as a human being, I can empathize with how she got to the condition that she has come to live her life by. And I think that it's kind of important for men to consider that part of what they're dealing with. If you're sitting across from a woman that you think should have some sort of moral compass, but her actions are telling you otherwise, it's not smart to delude yourself into thinking that she's just really cool or any of that shit. She's telling you some truths or showing you some truths about herself that you would be wise to pay attention to. These women are created. They don't just do this. Just like men who have different afflictions of their own character, you are a product of your experiences. And this person that I referred to as a monster, I did so only because of my own ego response. I don't really look at her as a monster. She's a person who was hurt and adapted the way that she goes through life a certain way. And this is a real tale about how this person got this way. And this happens way more often, and it's usually with a stepdad. But this type of shit happens way more often with young girls who are pretty, and it goes untalked about. And this is how this person ended up becoming a woman with Vietnam numbers. She watched her mother sleep with random men while she waited on her father to come back around, which he was never going to do. Her mother was just one of many. He got her pregnant, and he would pop in from time to time and use her mother for sex and then leave. And oftentimes he would parade whatever woman he was actually giving attention to in front of her mom. And so she would watch her mom deal with this. However, she felt that she needed to, in her response, because she was raped as a kid, her response was to fall back on her sexuality. So her mother would sleep with men who gave her attention while she was waiting on her father to return. When this girl turned about 13 or 14 years old, her and her friends started to sneak the car out and go party. Well, they ended up going to the college, I believe it was Michigan State, one of those colleges in Michigan that was close to their town, and she ended up being statutorily raped by a guy that was 23 or 24 years old. In her brain, she never quantified it as rape. She justified it as something that happened, and that was her imprint. That was her first sexual imprint. Well, from that point forward, she used her sexuality to get what she wanted from boys. She cheated probably on every guy that she was involved with in her teenage years, and then lost a lot of friends for sleeping with their boyfriends. She lost jobs for sleeping with bosses and trying to ruin marriages, and every relationship she had as an adult went the same pattern. But where this was created was this first sexual imprint, and then I believe when she was 16, she finally sought her father out. When she finds her father, she moves in with this fucking pervert. And one day she comes home and finds him sitting on the couch watching porn in his underwear. And he invites her to sit next to him and watch it with him. So she leaves and goes on and becomes just a person who I believe is seeking the father in the men that she beds. And she'll never find this. And because of this emptiness inside of her, there's never enough. And the moment that a slight even smell of abandonment or just being left alone, she runs to the next guy. There's always an umbrella. She's wounded. She's like a wounded cat just going from place to place seeking refuge. And the only thing that she's ever developed was the ability to have sex. Because at 14, she had stopped developing emotionally and mentally. Having a conversation with her is literally like having a conversation with a fucking teenage girl. Her mannerisms, the things that she does, everything about her is fucking childish. And you can see these things in the women that end up being the most catastrophic in your life if you just paid attention to the early signs and didn't let the things that you were seeing blind you. So knowing all of this shit, I invited this person into my life. And I have to ask, who was the real monster? Who was the real monster in the situation? Because I know what I did. But because I didn't like what was done back to me, I felt slighted. I got angry. And that's what we do. Rarely do we look at what we do. And I think that's where it begins. Go within inside yourself, men. Don't be afraid to be without women. Right now is a beautiful time to exfil and find out who you really are. Go inside of yourself and discover who you really are. What's your role? Who did you come here to be? You didn't come here to be a slave to relationships. You didn't come here to fix broken people, because you're probably broken yourself. So fix yourself. Fix yourself, and then you can start to fix those around you. You start with yourself. That's where it has to begin. It's all inside of you, gentlemen. It's all up to you. Stand up to yourself and be truthful, be honest. Look at where maybe you have been complicit in the shit that you don't like in this world, and start acting different. Your leaders. Fucking lead. Get some.